The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and laughter as friends and family celebrated the union of Emma and Lucas. I stood beside David, my husband of 12 years, watching the newlyweds dance under the soft glow of candlelight. The scent of jasmine from the floral arrangements mingled with the hum of music, and for a moment, it felt like nothing could tarnish the joy in the room. But then David's voice dropped to a whisper, sharp and cold against the warmth around us. "Maya, I need you to sign this tonight." His hand subtly pressed an envelope into mine, the weight of it heavier than the paper inside. The crowd around us was oblivious, caught up in toasts and smiles, but my heart stuttered. I glanced down at the envelope. No words, just the stark cream of the paper and the neat script of his handwriting on the front. I could feel his eyes drilling into me, expecting compliance, obedience. I knew what this was, another attempt to tighten the noose of control he had been weaving quietly for years. David's demand felt like a betrayal wrapped in civility. We were here to celebrate love, yet he was trying to wrest power over me in the shadows of this happy night. My fingers curled around the envelope, a flicker of defiance sparking to life. This was the moment I had sensed was coming, though I hadn't quite known when or how. "Why now?" I asked softly, keeping my voice low so no one else would hear. "Why tonight, at Emma's wedding?" His jaw tightened, and for a second, I saw the mask slip. "Because it needs to be done. You owe me that much after everything I've provided. This is just business, Maya." Business. The word cut through me. He spoke as if our marriage was a contract, not a partnership, as if I were a line item on a ledger instead of a person with dreams and rights. I forced myself to breathe steadily, to push down the surge of anger and disbelief. I looked up at him, into the eyes of the man who had slowly tried to shape me into someone smaller, quieter, more pliable. But tonight, I felt a flicker of something else, something fierce and unyielding. David's gaze hardened. "I'm serious. Sign it now, or we'll have a problem." Around us, the clinking of glasses and bursts of laughter continued, oblivious to the storm brewing beside the punch bowl. I felt the eyes of my friends and family across the room, but I didn't want their sympathy or interference. This was mine to handle. Mine to fight. I slid the envelope back toward him, my hand steady. "I'll read it first." His lips pressed into a thin line. "There's nothing to read. It's just a formality." I smiled, a slight, controlled curve of my lips that didn't reach my eyes. "I don't do formality without full understanding." David's hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a grip that burned beneath my skin. "Don't test me. You'll regret it." In that moment, I realized how much he had underestimated me. I had spent years playing the role he wanted, quiet, compliant, invisible. But the woman standing beside him now was different. She was awake. I withdrew my wrist and glanced briefly at our friends nearby. None were paying attention to the exchange, wrapped up in their own celebrations. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the noise of the party fading into the background as I faced the precipice of a decision. I folded my arms gently across my chest. "If you want me to sign anything, David, it has to be on my terms. Not yours." His eyes darkened, anger flashing. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Maybe because it's not just about a piece of paper," I replied, voice steady. "It's about trust. Respect. Partnership. Things we seem to be missing lately." A flicker of doubt crossed his face, quickly replaced by smug defiance. "You don't get to lecture me. You're lucky I even put up with you." The words hit like a slap, but I refused to show the hurt. Instead, I smiled again, this time with genuine calm. "I'm done being lucky. I'm done being silent." David's jaw clenched, and he stepped back slightly, as if realizing this was not the woman he'd married, or perhaps it was, finally shedding the layers of silence. I wondered briefly when I had last felt this strong, this clear. The music shifted to a slower song, couples swaying gently on the dance floor. Emma and Lucas moved gracefully, their happiness a stark contrast to the tension tightening the space between David and me. I tucked the envelope into my clutch and took a breath, steadying myself. This was no longer just a wedding celebration, it was a battleground. And I was ready to fight. David's voice dropped again, low and threatening. You'll regret this. I met his gaze without flinching. Maybe. But I'll regret losing myself more. He looked away, swallowing hard, and for a moment, the man I thought I knew vanished beneath the surface. The polished smile, the charm, the quiet manipulations, they all felt fragile now, exposed. I stepped away from him, weaving through the crowd toward the refreshment table. The cool glass of water in my hand steadied my shaking fingers. I needed time to think, to plan, because this was only the beginning. As I watched David from across the room, laughing with acquaintances who didn't see the duel unfolding beside them, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would not let him control me any longer. His attempt to manipulate me here, on this night of joy, had backfired. I was awake. I was aware. And I was ready. The wedding's festive glow dimmed slightly in my eyes, replaced by a steely resolve that pulsed beneath the surface. This envelope in my purse was more than just paper, it was a challenge. A test. And I intended to turn it on its head. Emma caught my eye from across the room and smiled warmly, oblivious to the war brewing beside her celebration. I returned the smile, grateful for the light she brought, but knowing that soon, my own story would take a very different turn. David's demand, his expectation of obedience, had been the spark. Now, the fire was mine to kindle. After the wedding, the quiet of our home felt suffocating. The laughter and music from the celebration still echoed faintly in my mind, but the weight of David's demand pressed heavily on my chest. That envelope sat on the kitchen counter, a silent challenge waiting to be unfolded. I resisted the urge to tear it open immediately. Instead, I allowed myself a moment of calm, letting the initial shock settle into something sharper, more focused. I poured a glass of water and leaned against the counter, my mind racing. David's words from the reception echoed in my ears: "You owe me that much." The arrogance, the entitlement, it was all so familiar, yet each time it stung anew. I had spent years navigating his subtle manipulations, the quiet control he exerted under the guise of partnership. But tonight, for the first time, I felt the full weight of his intentions laid bare. I thought back to the small signs I had brushed off over the years, the way he insisted on overseeing my spending, the way decisions about our finances were always made without me truly understanding the details. The way he dismissed my concerns as overreactions or emotional responses. I remembered the countless times I had swallowed my doubts to keep the peace, to maintain the facade of a happy marriage. But beneath that surface, I had been growing more aware. I had noticed inconsistencies in our bank statements, unexplained deductions, and vague references to investments that David never elaborated on. Each time I asked, he deflected, using charm or irritation to silence me. I had begun keeping quiet, not out of acceptance, but out of exhaustion. Now, with the envelope in front of me, I realized I couldn't stay quiet any longer. I reached for my phone and dialed my younger sister, Lena, my closest confidant and the one person who always saw through David's carefully constructed mask. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm but laced with concern. "Maya? Is everything okay?" I hesitated, then gave a small, ironic laugh. "Not exactly. I need your advice. Something's come up, and I'm not sure how to handle it." "Tell me." I explained the demand, the envelope, and David's insistence that I sign away control over my finances. Lena listened quietly, her silence a balm as I poured out the tangled mess of emotions, betrayal, anger, fear, and a growing resolve. "David's always been controlling," Lena said finally. "But this is different. It's a power move, plain and simple." I nodded, feeling the truth settle in my bones. I don't want to just say yes. I want to understand what's really in this document. I want to protect myself. "Then don't sign anything without a lawyer," she advised firmly. "You need someone who knows the law, someone who can help you see the full picture." Her words gave me a lifeline. I promised to meet with a lawyer the next day, determined to uncover the truth behind David's sudden urgency. After hanging up, I sat down at the kitchen table, the envelope staring back at me. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall, marking the steady passage of time. I realized how long I had been ignoring the subtle signs of manipulation, how often I had doubted my own instincts. I thought about all the times David had insisted that I wasn't capable of managing money, that I should trust him to handle everything. How he had framed his control as care, as protection. But now, his demand felt less like protection and more like a trap. I opened the envelope slowly, as if peeling back layers of a secret. Inside, the document was crisp and official-looking, filled with legal jargon that made my head spin. It was a power of attorney form, granting David full access and control over my finances, effective immediately. My hands trembled slightly as I scanned the text. If I signed this, I would be giving him unchecked authority over my accounts, my investments, everything I had worked for. It was a betrayal in ink, a legal cage disguised as a formality. But I refused to be caged. I closed the envelope and sat back, letting the reality settle. David hadn't just been trying to manipulate me emotionally, he was attempting to strip me of my autonomy, piece by piece. And I wasn't going to let him. The next morning, I made the call to a lawyer Lena had recommended, a woman named Claire who specialized in family and financial law. Her voice was calm and reassuring as I explained the situation, and she agreed to meet with me that afternoon. As I prepared for the meeting, I reflected on the years leading up to this moment. How I had buried my doubts beneath layers of compromise, how I had convinced myself that love meant sacrifice, even when it meant losing parts of myself. But now, I felt a spark of clarity. I was beginning to see the patterns of control and manipulation that had quietly woven themselves into the fabric of my marriage. At Claire's office, the warm light and shelves lined with legal tomes felt like a sanctuary. Claire listened intently as I laid out the envelope, the document, and David's behavior over the years. This power of attorney is significant, Claire explained, her fingers tracing the lines of the paper. If you sign this, David would have nearly unlimited control over your finances. It's unusual for a spouse to demand this suddenly, especially without thorough discussion. I nodded, grateful for her validation. It feels like a trap. Claire smiled sadly. It often is. Control over finances is a common tactic in manipulative relationships. But the law is on your side. We can challenge this, and you don't have to sign anything you're uncomfortable with. Her words ignited a cautious hope within me. For the first time, I felt I had an ally, someone who could help me navigate the maze of legalities and protect my rights. As I left the office, clutching a list of next steps Claire had outlined, I felt the weight in my chest shift, from suffocating pressure to focused determination. I had seen the cracks in David's carefully constructed facade, and I was ready to confront them. That evening, back at home, David asked again if I had signed the papers. I looked him squarely in the eye and said, "Not yet. And I'm going to make sure I understand everything before I do." His face tightened, frustration bubbling beneath his composure. "You're making this difficult." "No," I replied calmly. "I'm making this fair." For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control, not because David had given it to me, but because I had taken it back. The journey ahead was uncertain, and the path would be difficult, but I was no longer willing to be silent or compliant. I spent the next few days quietly gathering documents, reviewing financial statements, and confiding in Lena and Claire. Each piece of information added to the mosaic of understanding I was building, a picture of manipulation, yes, but also of resilience. At night, when the house was still, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of betrayal, but I refused to let it define me. Instead, I focused on the strength I was discovering within myself, the quiet power of awareness and refusal. David's demand had been the spark, but my response was becoming the flame. I was no longer the wife who blindly trusted, I was becoming a woman who demanded respect and truth. And I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet investigation and careful planning. I found myself peeling back the layers of David's carefully constructed facade, sifting through years of half-truths and omissions to uncover the reality he had tried so desperately to hide. I spent hours poring over bank statements and credit card bills, tracing transactions that didn't align with the life he portrayed. There were shadowy deposits and withdrawals, unexplained transfers to accounts I had never heard of, and a series of dinners and hotel stays that suddenly made sense in the new light of his manipulative pattern. Each discovery was a sting, but also a revelation. David's charm and control had masked a deeper game, one where my trust was a tool to be exploited, where my silence was a currency to be spent. And yet, with every uncovered secret, I felt my resolve harden. In the midst of this, I leaned heavily on Lena. Late one evening, we sat in my living room surrounded by documents and a laptop glowing softly with spreadsheets and emails. She was my anchor, her fierce loyalty and sharp mind a steadying force as I navigated the storm. "You see this?" I said, pointing to a series of encrypted messages on David's phone that Lena had managed to extract. "He's been communicating with someone off the books. I don't know who, but it's not just about money. There's something else." Lena frowned, her brow furrowing. "This isn't just financial manipulation. There's emotional deception, too. You've been isolated, Maya. That's how he's kept control." I swallowed hard, the truth settling like ice in my stomach. David's tactics went beyond money. They were about breaking me down, making me doubt myself until I was dependent on him. "I'm not going to let him win," I said quietly. "Not anymore." To fortify myself, I arranged a meeting with Claire again. She was a beacon of clarity amid the fog of betrayal. Together, we discussed strategies to protect my assets and build a case should David escalate his control. Claire emphasized the importance of documentation. "Keep everything: texts, emails, financial records. If this comes to court, evidence will be your strongest ally." I nodded, already compiling files and screenshots, constructing a digital fortress around my independence. The lawyer's confidence gave me a sliver of hope, a roadmap through the labyrinth of manipulation. Meanwhile, David's behavior grew more insistent. He pressed me repeatedly to sign the documents, his tone shifting from coaxing to sharp impatience. But I stood firm, refusing to be rushed or intimidated. One evening, as I sat at the dining table reviewing another batch of statements, David appeared behind me, his presence looming. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, voice low and edged with menace. I looked up calmly. "I'm making sure I'm protected." "That's not hard, that's necessary." His eyes flashed. "You're trying to undermine me. This marriage." I shook my head. "No. I'm trying to save it from lies and control." He scoffed, retreating with a bitter laugh. "You don't get to decide what's best." But I did. And I was done pretending otherwise. The emotional toll was real. Some nights, the weight of betrayal and uncertainty pressed down so heavily I struggled to breathe. I wrestled with feelings of anger, sadness, and a piercing loneliness that cut deeper than any argument. Yet, amid the turmoil, I found pockets of strength. I reconnected with old friends I had drifted away from, people who reminded me of who I was beyond David's shadow. Their support was a balm, a reminder that I was not alone. One afternoon, Lena and I sat in a quiet cafe, the soft hum of conversation around us. I shared my fears and hopes, the plan taking shape in my mind. "I'm going to fight this," I told her. "Not just for me, but for anyone who's been silenced like I was." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're already stronger than you know." With her words echoing in my heart, I began to devise a strategy, a careful dance of patience and precision. I would gather evidence, consult experts, and prepare to confront David on my terms. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about reclaiming my life and identity. At home, I started strengthening my digital security. Passwords changed, accounts monitored, and a separate email address created to communicate with Claire and trusted friends. I was building walls around my independence, brick by deliberate brick. In the quiet moments, I reflected on the years lost to manipulation, the subtle erosion of my confidence, the silencing of my voice. But I also saw the woman I was becoming, alert, assertive, unwilling to be controlled. David's demand had ignited a fire within me, a fierce determination to rewrite the narrative of our marriage. No longer would I be the quiet, compliant wife. I was awakening to my own power. Late one evening, I sat by the window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. The envelope still rested unopened in my bag, a symbol of the battle ahead. But I was ready. I would face this head-on, armed with knowledge, support, and an unshakable will. David thought he could manipulate me, that I would meekly comply. He was about to learn that the woman he tried to control was already 3 steps ahead. And this was only the beginning. David's persistence escalated in a way that caught even me by surprise. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows lengthened across our living room, he cornered me with a look that was equal parts frustration and determination. "Maya, this has gone far enough," he said, voice low but firm. "I'm asking you one last time, sign the papers. Stop dragging this out." I met his gaze steadily, refusing to let the flicker of fear I felt surface. "No, David. I won't sign until I fully understand what I'm giving up." His eyes narrowed, and the polite veneer cracked, revealing the man I had quietly feared for years. "You're being difficult on purpose. You want a fight, don't you?" I shook my head slowly. "I want fairness and respect. I want honesty." He laughed, a bitter sound that echoed in the room. "Honesty? You're the one hiding things, snooping through my accounts, spying on my messages. That's not honesty, that's betrayal." I stood my ground. "I'm protecting myself. Something you should have considered before trying to control every aspect of my life." David's frustration boiled over. "You don't get to talk to me like that. You're my wife. And I'm a person," I said firmly. "Not your possession." For a moment, the room was thick with silence, the tension palpable. Then, something shifted in me, a surge of courage that broke through the years of suppression. "I'm setting boundaries, David," I continued, voice steady. "You wanted control, but I'm taking back my life. If you can't respect that, then we have a real problem." His face turned a shade paler, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty flicker behind his eyes. He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. "This isn't a negotiation anymore." David's shoulders slumped slightly, and he retreated with a bitter glare. "You're making this impossible." "Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen," I replied quietly. That night, as I lay awake, I realized the balance of power between us was shifting. For years, David had commanded the narrative, but now, I was rewriting the script. The man who once believed I would comply without question was confronted with a woman who refused to be silenced. In the days that followed, I maintained firm boundaries. When David tried to engage me in conversations about the documents, I redirected or declined. When he sent texts demanding compliance, I didn't respond immediately, choosing my words carefully. At home, I became intentional about reclaiming my space, both physical and emotional. I rearranged the furniture in our shared office, creating a small nook where I could work and think without interruption. I set times when I would be offline to process and strategize, refusing to be drawn into his attempts to dominate my time. One afternoon, during a family brunch, David approached me with a softer tone, attempting to mask his frustration. "Maya, can we talk?" "Just the 2 of us," he said, glancing around. I studied his face carefully. Was this an olive branch or another tactic? "I'm willing to listen," I said cautiously, but on my terms. We found a quiet corner away from the crowd. David's posture was less rigid, but his eyes held a challenge. "I don't want to fight," he began. "I just want what's best for us." I shook my head gently. "What's best for us isn't what you decide alone. It's what we decide together, respectfully." He paused, then sighed. "I thought I was protecting us." "Protecting me by stripping away my autonomy isn't protection," I said. "It's control." David looked away, the weight of my words settling between us. I'm not the person I used to be, I continued. I can't be. I've seen too much, felt too much. And I won't go back to silence. He finally met my gaze, a flicker of something like regret crossing his features. Then what do you want? I want honesty. Transparency. Partnership. For a long moment, he was silent. Then, almost reluctantly, he nodded. I'll think about it. That small acknowledgement, though tentative, was a victory. In the evenings, I continued to build my support network. Lena was my sounding board, offering encouragement and perspective. Claire helped me understand the legal landscape, preparing me for whatever David might throw my way. With every conversation, every document reviewed, I felt my confidence grow. The woman who had once trembled at David's demands was evolving into someone fierce and capable. Yet, I knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges. David's attempts to manipulate and control were deeply ingrained. But now, I had drawn a line in the sand, a boundary he could no longer cross without consequence. One afternoon, as I reviewed financial statements, I received a message from David. Can we sit down and talk tonight? No pressure, just a conversation. I hesitated but agreed, sensing this was a critical moment. That evening, we met in the living room, the tension thick but tempered by a new undercurrent of mutual recognition. Thank you for agreeing to talk, I began. David nodded. I want to understand where you're coming from. I explained my concerns, my discoveries, and most importantly, my desire for fairness and respect. He listened, sometimes interrupting, but mostly absorbing. When I finished, I asked, can you commit to transparency? To working together? David's eyes searched mine. I can try. It wasn't a promise, but it was a start. As the night wore on, the walls between us shifted slightly. The battle had not ended, but the war for control was no longer one-sided. I felt the first true stirrings of hope, not that everything would be perfect overnight, but that change was possible. When David finally left the room, I sat alone, the weight of the evening settling in. I allowed myself a small, tentative smile. For the first time in years, I felt the scales tipping. I was no longer the woman who would quietly comply. I was the woman who stood firm, and I was ready for whatever came next. The days that followed David's tentative promise to try transparency were a strange blend of hope and unease. On the surface, there was an almost fragile peace, but beneath it, I wrestled with a storm of emotions, betrayal, fear, and a deep-seated determination to protect myself no matter what. One evening, as I sat curled on the sofa with a book I barely touched, my phone buzzed with a message from Lena. How are you holding up? Need to talk? I typed back quickly, grateful for her unwavering presence. Struggling, but managing. Can we meet tomorrow? Lena's support was my lifeline. She understood the quiet battles I fought alone and reminded me of the strength buried deep inside. She was more than my sister, she was my anchor. The next day, we met at our favorite cafe, a cozy spot with soft jazz playing in the background and the rich aroma of coffee filling the air. I poured out everything, the confrontation with David, the uneasy truce, the lingering doubts. You're not just fighting him, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm fighting the part of myself that wanted to believe in him, that wanted to trust. Lena reached across the table, her hand warm over mine. That's the hardest part, unlearning what you thought was real. Her words struck a chord. I realized how much I had sacrificed, my voice, my confidence, even my dreams, to maintain the image of a happy marriage. The years of subtle control had eroded my sense of self, leaving a fragile shell that trembled beneath David's demands. But now, with Lena's support and Claire's guidance, I was beginning to rebuild. Back at home, the quiet moments were both a refuge and a reminder of the distance growing between us. David tried to engage me in conversation, but I maintained my boundaries, refusing to be drawn into old patterns of manipulation. One afternoon, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone, snapshots of happier times, smiles frozen in pixels. I traced the images with a finger, feeling a mix of nostalgia and sorrow. Who was that woman? The one who believed in promises, who trusted without question. The truth was clear, she was gone. That realization was painful, but it also ignited a spark of empowerment. I was no longer willing to be a passive participant in my own life. I began to carve out time for myself, morning walks, journaling, reconnecting with passions I had shelved long ago. Each step was a reclamation of identity, a quiet rebellion against the years of suppression. David noticed the change. His tone shifted from commanding to cautious, as if testing the boundaries I had set. "You're different," he remarked one evening, his eyes searching mine. "I don't know if that's good or bad." I met his gaze steadily. "It's necessary." That night, alone in my room, I grappled with the conflicting emotions swirling inside me. The love I had once felt for David was tangled with disappointment and hurt. But beneath it all was a growing clarity: I deserved respect, honesty, and partnership. I reached out to Claire, updating her on the developments. She reminded me to document everything, to keep a clear record of interactions and any attempts at control. Her professionalism was reassuring, but it also underscored the seriousness of the situation. This was more than a marital disagreement, it was a battle for autonomy. As the weeks passed, I noticed subtle shifts in our social circle. Friends who once sided with David began to ask questions, sensing the tension beneath our polished appearances. Some offered quiet support, others avoided involvement altogether. It was a reminder that manipulation often thrives in silence, and breaking free meant risking isolation. But I refused to retreat. One afternoon, Lena and I sat in the park, watching children play and couples stroll hand in hand. The world seemed both fragile and resilient, a reflection of my own journey. "I'm scared," I admitted, the words raw and unfiltered. "Scared of what might come next." Lena squeezed my hand. "Fear is a sign you're alive. It means you care. But don't let it stop you." Her words echoed in my heart, bolstering my courage. I began to speak more openly with close friends, sharing pieces of my story. Their empathy and encouragement fortified me, reminding me that I was not alone. At home, I continued to enforce boundaries with David. When he attempted to discuss the documents or financial matters without respect, I redirected the conversation or walked away. It was exhausting but necessary. One evening, as I prepared dinner, David approached with an unusual softness. "Can we try counseling?" he asked hesitantly. "Maybe it would help us understand each other." I paused, considering. Part of me wanted to believe in the possibility of healing, but experience urged caution. "I'm willing to try," I said slowly, "but only if it's about honesty and respect, not control." He nodded, a flicker of hope in his eyes. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a tentative sense of possibility. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges, but I was no longer walking it blindly. I had found my voice, and with it, the strength to face whatever came next. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, I felt the seeds of true partnership might take root. The weeks that followed the tentative agreement to try counseling were a mixture of cautious optimism and strategic vigilance. I knew better than to let my guard down completely, yet I welcomed the chance to understand David's perspective, and more importantly, to assert mine. Claire had advised me to keep detailed records of all interactions, especially those related to finances and any attempts at manipulation. I became meticulous, saving emails, texts, and notes from conversations. It felt invasive, like walking on eggshells, but it was necessary armor. At our first counseling session, the room felt sterile yet promising, a neutral ground where truths could be aired without fear of immediate judgment. The counselor, a woman named Dr. Harper, exuded calm professionalism, guiding us through exercises designed to foster communication and empathy. David appeared guarded, his usual assertiveness tempered by uncertainty. I, too, was cautious, wary of traps but hopeful for progress. In one session, Dr. Harper asked us to share moments when we felt most connected. David spoke of early days, of shared dreams and laughter. I recounted memories tinged with both warmth and pain, careful to articulate my feelings without accusation. The sessions were challenging. David's defenses often flared, and I caught glimpses of the man behind the mask, the insecurities and fears that fueled his need for control. But I also saw his capacity for reflection, however limited. Outside counseling, my investigation continued. With Claire's help, I uncovered more financial irregularities, accounts David had set up without my knowledge, investments that seemed designed to isolate me financially. I confronted him gently but firmly. "David, these hidden accounts, why didn't you tell me?" He hesitated, then muttered something about protecting me from stress. But the excuse rang hollow. "I'm not a child," I said. "We're supposed to be partners." His silence spoke volumes. Meanwhile, I discreetly gathered evidence, screenshots of messages, copies of bank statements, records of expenses. Each piece was a puzzle fragment, revealing a pattern of deception and manipulation. One evening, I shared some of my findings with Claire, who nodded gravely. "This isn't just about control, it's about undermining your autonomy," she said. "We need to prepare for all possibilities." Her words were a stark reminder that this battle was far from over. But armed with knowledge and support, I felt stronger. At home, tensions simmered beneath the surface. David's attempts to assert dominance were met with my unwavering boundaries. When he tried to discuss finances without transparency, I deferred to Claire's advice, "Let's review this together with our lawyer." The shift unsettled him. For the first time, he faced resistance that wasn't rooted in fear or compliance. Outside our walls, I rebuilt connections with friends and family, sharing carefully chosen details of my situation. Their support was a balm, a reminder that I was not isolated. One afternoon, I sat with Lena, reviewing documents and mapping out next steps. "David underestimated you," she said, eyes fierce with admiration. "He thought you'd fold." I smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. "I'm not folding," I replied. "I'm taking control." The counseling sessions evolved into a battleground of truths and defenses. Sometimes, progress was made, other times, old patterns resurfaced with a vengeance. But each session peeled back layers, revealing the complexities of our fractured relationship. David began to realize that his manipulations would no longer be hidden. He was confronted with evidence, with my refusal to comply blindly. One evening, after a particularly intense session, he looked at me with something akin to respect, though tinged with frustration. "You're stronger than I thought," he admitted quietly. I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not the woman you tried to control." That night, as I lay awake, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. The journey was arduous, fraught with emotional landmines, but I was no longer alone. With Claire's guidance, Lena's support, and my own growing strength, I was crafting a new narrative, one where I reclaimed my identity and power. The envelope David had pressed into my hand weeks ago remained unopened on my desk, a symbol of the conflict and the catalyst for change. I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with truth and determination. David's attempts to manipulate me had met an unyielding force. And the tables had turned. The truth has a way of unraveling even the most carefully woven facades, and in the weeks that followed, David's carefully guarded image began to crack, not just in our home, but within our circle of friends and family. It started subtly. A whispered conversation at a gathering here, a concerned glance exchanged there. I noticed the shift, the way people's eyes lingered a little longer, the hesitance before they spoke. The man who had commanded respect and admiration was now facing whispers of suspicion and doubt. One afternoon, I received a call from Emma, the bride whose wedding had set this entire chain of events in motion. Her voice was soft but resolute. "Maya, I don't know all the details, but I've heard things. I want you to know I'm here for you." Her words were a balm, a reminder that I wasn't isolated in this. It was a turning point, signaling that David's attempts to control the narrative were failing. At a dinner with close friends, the undercurrent of tension was palpable. Some tried to defend David, reluctant to believe the man they thought they knew could act with such manipulation. Others offered quiet support, their loyalty shifting toward me. One friend, Claire's colleague from the legal world, leaned in during a moment alone. "Maya, what you're doing takes incredible courage. People don't always see the signs of manipulation until it's too late. You're shining a light where it's needed. Her words strengthened my resolve. I realized that exposing David's behavior wasn't just about protecting myself, it was about breaking the silence that allowed manipulation to flourish. Meanwhile, David's reaction to the growing scrutiny was a mix of denial and anger. He lashed out in private messages, accusing me of betrayal and exaggeration. But in public, he wore a mask of composure, attempting to maintain his image. I refused to engage in his attempts to twist the truth. Instead, I leaned on my support network, sharing only what was necessary and safeguarding my emotional well-being. At home, the atmosphere was charged. David's frustration simmered beneath polite exchanges, his control slipping through my fingers like sand. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, he confronted me. "You're turning everyone against me," he accused, voice low and sharp. I met his gaze without flinching. "I'm telling the truth. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's time to reflect." His face flushed with anger, but I held my ground. The social fallout was difficult. Some friends withdrew, unsure where to place their loyalties. Family gatherings became strained. But I found solace in those who stood by me, their support a steady current beneath the storm. Lena was a constant presence, offering encouragement and perspective. "People will come around," she assured me. "The truth has a way of rising." I clung to that hope. At one point, a mutual friend approached me privately. "David's been talking," she said cautiously. "He's worried about what you might do next." Her words confirmed my suspicion that my resistance was rattling him more than he let on. I realized that my silence was no longer an option. To protect myself and the life I was rebuilding, I needed to be vocal and visible. I began to share my story selectively, speaking with trusted friends and family, creating a network of allies who understood the reality beneath the surface. The conversations were difficult but necessary. Each time I spoke, I reclaimed a piece of myself that David had tried to suppress. At work, I found renewed focus and energy. I confided in a few colleagues, careful to maintain professionalism but grateful for their understanding. Their support reminded me that my identity extended beyond the confines of my marriage. One afternoon, Lena and I sat in a sunlit park, reflecting on the tumultuous months behind us. "It's hard," I admitted. "Watching everything unravel." She smiled gently. "But sometimes, unraveling is the first step to rebuilding." Her words resonated deeply. I knew the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I was no longer afraid. David's facade was crumbling, and with it, the power he once held over me. I was stepping into the light, ready to face whatever came next with strength and clarity. The social fallout was painful, but it was a necessary reckoning. Manipulation thrives in shadows, and I was determined to bring everything into the open. As word spread, more people began to question the version of events David had presented. His carefully maintained image faltered, leaving him isolated in ways he hadn't anticipated. Through it all, I remained focused on my goal, reclaiming my life, my autonomy, and my dignity. The battle was far from over, but the tide was turning. And for the first time, I felt the weight of control shifting firmly into my hands. The day I decided to reclaim my life in earnest, I woke up with a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The weight of months of betrayal, manipulation, and quiet resistance pressed down on me, but beneath it was a fierce determination I hadn't known I possessed. It was time to step away from the shadows and build something new, something that belonged entirely to me. I dusted off my laptop and opened a blank document, the cursor blinking expectantly. Graphic design had once been my passion, a career I had set aside to support David's ambitions and maintain the image of a perfect marriage. Now, it was my lifeline back to myself. I started by reaching out to old clients and colleagues, cautiously testing the waters. Slowly but surely, projects began to trickle in: logos, social media campaigns, website layouts. Each completed task was a small victory, a reminder that I was more than just a wife caught in a web of control. The work energized me. The hours spent lost in color palettes and typography were therapeutic, a stark contrast to the exhausting emotional battles at home. I found clarity in creativity, a sense of purpose outside the confines of my marriage. Lena became my unofficial business manager, helping me set up a simple website and social media profiles. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and her belief in me bolstered my confidence. One afternoon, as we sat in a cafe discussing branding strategies, Lena smiled and said, "You're building something incredible, Maya. Not just a business, but a new life." Her words felt like a balm to my soul. Meanwhile, at home, the atmosphere had shifted. David's attempts to control me became less frequent, perhaps sensing the growing distance between us. He seemed uncertain, as if the woman he once thought pliable was slipping away. I maintained firm boundaries, focusing on my work and personal growth. The counseling sessions continued, but I no longer relied solely on them for clarity. I was carving my own path. Friends and family noticed the change. Some expressed admiration, others curiosity. I welcomed their support but kept the details of my journey private, sharing only what felt necessary. One evening, after wrapping up a client presentation, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city lights twinkle. The cool breeze whispered promises of freedom and possibility. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who had almost signed away her autonomy without question. And the woman I was becoming, resilient, empowered, and unapologetically herself. Amid the challenges, I found moments of peace and joy. Weekend hikes with Lena, quiet mornings journaling, spontaneous coffee dates with friends, all small acts of reclaiming my identity. Financially, I began to regain control. With Claire's guidance, I reviewed our joint accounts and took steps to secure my assets. David's hidden accounts were exposed, his attempts at secrecy thwarted by documentation and legal advice. The process was draining, but each step forward was a testament to my resolve. At work, I took on more ambitious projects, expanding my portfolio and building a network of clients who valued my creativity and professionalism. The satisfaction of being my own boss was immeasurable. One afternoon, a client called to thank me for a branding overhaul that had revitalized their business. Her gratitude resonated deeply, reminding me that my talents could touch lives beyond my own struggles. Amid this renaissance, I stayed connected to the emotional work of healing. Therapy sessions helped me unpack the layers of manipulation and rebuild my self-worth. Lena remained my steadfast support, celebrating milestones and offering comfort during setbacks. David and I crossed paths less frequently. When we did, our interactions were civil but distant. The power dynamics had shifted, and I no longer feared his presence. One evening, as I closed my laptop after a productive day, I felt a profound sense of gratitude, for the hardships that had awakened me, for the support that sustained me, and for the future unfolding before me. The envelope, the symbol of David's attempt to control me, sat unopened in a drawer. It no longer held power over me. Instead, it was a reminder of how far I had come. I was no longer defined by the past or by David's manipulations. I was a woman who had reclaimed her voice, her career, and her life. And as I looked ahead, I embraced the freedom and strength that came from standing on my own. The morning of the legal meeting arrived with a quiet intensity that settled over me like a shroud. Months of preparation, gathering evidence, and steeling my nerves had led to this moment, the day I would face David not as the compliant wife he once knew, but as a woman armed with truth, resolve, and the support of those who believed in me. Claire met me at the courthouse, her calm professionalism a steady anchor amidst the storm swirling inside me. We reviewed the documents one last time, the financial records, the recorded conversations, the timeline of manipulative behaviors. Each piece was a thread in the tapestry of evidence I was presenting, a clear picture of control and deceit. When David arrived, his usual confident demeanor was tempered by a flicker of uncertainty. He avoided my gaze, perhaps sensing that the power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The hearing room was stark, the silence punctuated only by the soft rustle of papers and hushed voices. As the proceedings began, I felt the weight of every past betrayal and every hard-won victory converge into a singular focus. Claire opened with a clear, concise presentation of the facts, laying bare David's attempts to seize control of my finances through the power of attorney document he had pressured me to sign. The evidence was undeniable: hidden accounts, unauthorized transfers, and messages that revealed his true intentions. David's defense was a mix of denial and deflection, but the carefully documented proof left little room for doubt. His facade crumbled as witnesses, friends and family who had observed the changes in his behavior, provided statements that corroborated my claims. Throughout the hearing, I maintained my composure, drawing strength from the months of preparation and the knowledge that I was finally reclaiming my life. When the judge made the ruling, upholding the prenup and invalidating the power of attorney document, a wave of relief and vindication washed over me. The legal system had recognized the manipulation, and justice had been served. David's face drained of color, the reality of his losses settling in like a cold shadow. His attempts to control me had been thwarted, and the consequences were clear. As we left the courthouse, a small crowd of supporters, friends, family, and colleagues, gathered to offer congratulations and encouragement. Their presence was a testament to the strength I had found in community and truth. In the days that followed, word spread of David's financial struggles and the unraveling of his personal life. Cassandra, the woman he had been involved with, quietly distanced herself, further isolating him. For me, the victory was more than legal, it was deeply personal. I had transformed from a woman trapped by manipulation into a person who had reclaimed her power and identity. The process was not without its emotional toll. I mourned the loss of the marriage I had once hoped would survive, but I did so with a sense of clarity and purpose. I began to plan the next chapter of my life, a future defined not by the shadows of control but by the light of independence and self-respect. Amelia, my daughter, stood by my side throughout, her unwavering support a source of strength. Her own journey into adulthood had been shaped by the revelations and challenges we faced together. We talked openly about boundaries, trust, and the importance of standing up for oneself. Our relationship deepened, rooted in honesty and mutual respect. As the final divorce hearing approached, set poignantly on what would have been our 29th anniversary, I felt a profound sense of closure. The legal proceedings were formalities now, the difficult work having been done. When the judge signed the decree, David left with little, his facade shattered. I retained our home and financial security, the fruits of years of careful planning and resilience. In our final meeting, David acknowledged his mistakes, a rare moment of vulnerability that hinted at understanding. For the first time, I felt he truly saw the consequences of his actions. Walking away from the courthouse that day, I carried with me more than legal papers. I carried a renewed sense of self and the knowledge that I had emerged stronger. The envelope David had once pressed into my hand was no longer a symbol of control but a reminder of my transformation. I had turned the tables, claiming not just victory but empowerment. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains as I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee warming my hands. The house was quiet, a stillness I hadn't experienced in years. Today marked a new beginning, not just the end of a chapter, but the start of a life I had fought to reclaim. The consultancy I had launched was thriving beyond my expectations. What began as a modest endeavor to help women navigate financial transitions during difficult times had blossomed into a full-fledged business. Calls came daily from women seeking guidance, those who, like me, had faced manipulation, betrayal, and uncertainty. I listened, advised, and empowered, drawing from my own journey to illuminate theirs. Each success story fueled my passion. Helping others find their footing and reclaim their identities was not just work, it was a calling. It reminded me that my struggle had purpose beyond personal vindication. Amelia called from Charleston that morning, her voice bright with excitement. "Mom, I'm proud of you. You've built something incredible." Her words wrapped around me like a warm embrace. Amelia's unwavering support had been my anchor through the storm. Watching her grow into a confident, compassionate woman was a source of profound joy. Since the divorce, our relationship had deepened. No longer shrouded in secrecy or tension, our conversations were honest and open. We shared hopes, fears, and dreams, each of us stronger for the other's presence. The house felt like a sanctuary now, filled with light, laughter, and the promise of freedom. I had redecorated the rooms to reflect my renewed spirit, each corner a testament to resilience and reinvention. The envelope David had once pressed into my hand sat framed on the wall, a symbol of the moment I chose strength over silence, action over submission. Looking back, the journey had been arduous. The betrayal, the manipulation, the battles fought in silence and in court, all had tested me beyond measure. But through it all, I discovered a power that had lain dormant, the power to define my own destiny. I remembered the day I first refused to sign the papers, the night I confided in Lena, the hours spent gathering evidence, the courtroom battles, and the quiet moments of doubt and determination. Each step had brought me closer to the woman I was meant to be. David had faded into the background of my life, a chapter closed. The man who once sought to control me was now a distant memory, his lessons etched into my story but no longer dictating its course. As I prepared for a speaking engagement at a women's empowerment conference, I felt a surge of gratitude. Sharing my story, to inspire, to educate, to encourage, was a gift I never imagined I'd be able to give. I stood before the audience, eyes meeting those of women who had faced their own struggles. My voice was steady as I recounted the journey from manipulation to empowerment, the challenges overcome, and the triumphs achieved. Afterward, a woman approached, tears glistening in her eyes. "Your story gave me hope," she said softly. "Thank you." In that moment, I understood fully that my revenge was not in retribution but in reinvention. The power I had reclaimed was a beacon for others navigating their own darkness. The envelope was no longer a weapon but a key to freedom, identity, and strength. I had turned the tables not to punish, but to rise. And in rising, I found myself. If you loved the story, like the video and subscribe.